Today, we're looking at Birmingham Pen Company's Gene Kelly Raspberry Rain. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Birmingham Pen Company's Gene Kelly Raspberry Rain is a kind of magenta toned ink. And to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a cross Bailey with a medium nib to take my notes for this video. Before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is a chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is this really light purple on the bottom that comes up. It's a dark purple to the magenta as it moves up. It's very interesting. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And that purple that was at the bottom is now mostly in a solid line together, which makes me feel that the purpley bits might be what holds out during the resistance. Some of the purple does run up, and we do get some of this very, very light magenta towards the top. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pens. Looking at the highlighter, it seems to handle it very well. We don't see any real spread and feathering. It doesn't become gross and unreadable. That makes me feel confident to use this in that note-taking situation where I might need to highlight. That's a very surprising result when we look at what happens with water. Water completely reactivates and pulls almost all this ink up off the page. Yes, there's some discoloration left behind, and we do see some of the purple, but that was 30 seconds of water being on the page and almost all of it's going out. This makes me very confident that it would only take water to get this out of your pen, especially when we look at what flush does. The flush solution didn't do more than the water. It actually did less. It removed less of this ink. The white that's beginning to show through on the flush is a little more pure. It's a little more of a white and not a creamy white that we got from the water. But that's really inconsistent when we see what happens with bleach. Bleach is completely obliterating it, but it's leaving this creamy white color behind. So I'm going to fall back to the idea that water should be all you need to clean this ink out of your pen. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Birmingham Pen Company's Gene Kelly Raspberry Rain has a viscosity of 3.05, which makes it quite dry. It's a drier ink. It just simply means that not as much ink is going onto the page while you're writing, but it may have more stuff in it. It can still be a very dense ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Birmingham Pen Company's Gene Kelly Raspberry Rain has an average dry time of 10 seconds, making it a pretty fast drying ink. It is not fast, but it is definitely faster than some inks marketed as fast dry. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and as I've stated a number of times before, but this might be the first time you see it, be careful where you open this. The little plastic insert, it splatters all over the place. Make sure you are in a very, very, very ink-safe environment, because this is messy. And these are a pain in the butt to fill from. Yep. So there's that. To keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at Clairefontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shading, not in the writing. Slightly darker tone with the extra fine, has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It does offer bits of shading throughout the writing, which is very pleasant to look at. We see the Q starts darker, gets much lighter in the down sweep. It stays pretty consistent in color, but gets much darker again at the K. Nice shading in the writing. Very nice shading in this writing. The brown holds one tone, but then Fox gives us two tones within the writing. Over shows us a lot of tones within a writing, so it shades very nicely with the extra fine. Only 5 seconds to dry. Now the medium is a much darker tone. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 10 seconds to dry. The scrubby for the extra fine shows us color variation, and we got color variation. The scrubby for the medium shows us none, and we didn't get any. The smear test says you could likely recover this. So Tomoe River. We get no bleeding. We do get ghosting. The 1.1. No feather, no spread. It does have haloing all over it. I'd say all over it, not in the lightest parts of it. In certain other areas. So it does have quite a bit of haloing. I said all over. I didn't really mean all over. At the top of the L's in Kelly, I don't see any haloing, but I do see it all over in the Y. So that's there. Okay? There's no sheen. There is light shading that goes on. When it goes on just a little bit darker, we're not seeing tremendous color variation between the L's and the Y, but there is a little bit. It's just that when it's a little bit heavier in a spot, we get that halo. So not really a lot of the color variation, but when it's a little heavier, we see some of the haloing occur, which is very nice. Not a lot of shading, though. Extra fine, same tone that we got with the 1.1. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade in this writing. 10 seconds to dry. The medium is a noticeably darker tone. It has no feather, no spread. It has a lot of the haloing occur because it's that thicker, and this ink gives that very nice halo. No sheen, no shade, not in this writing sample. 17 seconds to dry. The extra fine shows no color variation. The medium shows no color variation on the scrubbies. We didn't get any color variation in a writing sample, and I don't believe you could recover this if you smeared it while you were writing. Rhodia. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It does offer gentle shading throughout, which is very nice to look at with that 1.1. Very nice. It's pretty, like the way you see Jean starts darker, gets lighter, gets darker again. Kelly has on the K a few lighter spots, and the bottom of the K gets much darker. The E goes from dark to light. First L is light, second L is a bit darker, the top of the second L is a bit lighter. Very nice shading in the 1.1. The same tone for extra fine. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and yes, we get that same gentle shading that went on with the 1.1. Very nice to look at, especially when we see words like over. Starts very light, dark at the bottom of the O, gets light again, dark at the bottom of the V. The E is dark, the R is dark. It's very nice to look at. Fox is dark on the left side, gets lighter. The O stays a little lighter, the X gets darker. Very pretty. 6 seconds to dry. The medium, noticeably darker tone. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shading at all. 13 seconds to dry. The scrubbies, the extra fine shows us some color variation. We did get color variation. The medium shows us none. We didn't get any. The smear test says you could likely recover it. So I looked at black and red paper. Black and red gave us no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 gave no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no shade on this paper with that nib and ink. Extra fine, slightly darker tone than we had with the 1.1. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Light spots where it goes over quite a bit more, like on the K, it's a little bit darker. The H and the is a little bit darker. The B in brown is a little bit darker, but that's about it. So there is some spots of shading, just not very many. And 4 seconds to dry. Now a very noticeably darker tone is the medium, with no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 7 seconds to dry. The extra fine shows us a little bit of color variation in the scrubby. We did get little spots of color variation with the writing sample. The medium shows us no color variation. We didn't get any in the writing sample. And the smear test, I don't think you could recover this. There's a maybe. Limon paper. Look at that bleed. But at least it didn't touch the page underneath, so there's a positive. It did bleed with the extra fine. Not nearly as bad as the medium. We have a ton of show through. Such a thick paper to have so much trouble. The 1.1, it feathers, it spreads, it feathers like crazy. It's blurry. That's not my camera. That's the feathering. No halo, no sheen, no shade. The extra fine, same tone as the 1.1. It spreads, it feathers all over the place. Although this feathering's not out of control, I believe you could use it. It has no halo, no sheen, no shade. It took 5 seconds to dry. The medium is where things get especially gross because it gets darker, much darker tone, which makes all of the ugliness of what occurred on this paper stand out. Yes, it has a ton of spread. Yes, it has crazy amounts of feathering. It has no halo, no sheen, no shade. It took 8 seconds to dry. The extra fine scrubby showed no color variation. We didn't get any color variation. Same with the medium, no color variation. We didn't get any. And the smear test, you know, you could recover it. Here, it's got that going for it. Ugh. Strathmore calligraphy paper. This is a laid paper. It has no bleeding, no ghosting. Very nice paper to work on. Sometimes you see things that look like they might be the beginnings of feathering, and it's not really. It is, if I can get a close-up of the paper. I went too fast on the camera. Come on. There we go. You can see the texture of the paper. It's a laid paper. So that texture sometimes looks like it's a beginning of feathering, and it's not necessarily the feathering. It's that the ink itself might be a little thinner in spots. If it's a little more like water, then you might see something that appears like feathering, and it's not really feathering. It's following that grain because it is a liquid. 1.1, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. It does follow the grain of the paper a number of times. When I get real close to look at it, in the spots like the K looks like it's got a bunch of feathering, and the R looks like it has a bunch of feathering. It's not feathering. It's not absorbing into the paper and pushing out in different directions like spikes. What it's doing is it's just laying down on the ridges of the paper. Extra fine. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Yes, it does give us some nice color variation. Quick shows a lot of color variation. Brown shows a lot of variation. Over and the are totally different tones. It only took 4 seconds to dry. The medium, a noticeably darker tone. The following the texture of the paper becomes a bit more noticeable there also. It had no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We lost color variation with it going down thicker. 6 seconds to dry. The scrubby, the extra fine shows some color variation. We did get some color variation. The medium shows none. We didn't get any. And the smear test says you could likely recover it if you smeared while you were writing. And that's all that I have for the writing sample. Instead of finding inks that look like Birmingham Pen Company's Gene Kelly Raspberry Rain, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Now, because this is kind of a dull magenta color, I really wanted a bright purple to go with it. And I chose Diamine's Imperial Purple. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Birmingham Pen Company's Gene Kelly Raspberry Rain? I think it shares a lot of qualities that a lot of the Birmingham Pens inks have had, which is that it tends to have a kind of dusty color, which is okay when that's what you like. This ink performs pretty decent. You can get different shading depending on the nib and flow of the pen that you choose to use, which does mean there's some variety in the tones of this ink that you're going to get. Thanks for watching.